What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Try Time Podcast. I'm Matt, and you join me for the second instalment of our Team's Ultimate 117, where we look at each position and the bench and give our opinions on what the best players are in a certain club's history. For players who do span the Super League era, we have included their achievements before the Sky money came in, and we've factored in those because otherwise it wouldn't be fair. Likewise, we've had to find a cut-off because if we went from all time, then we'd never get a list together. There's too many good players. If you haven't checked out the previous iteration of this we did with Wigan, go and do so. Either do that now and come back to this one, or once you've watched this, go see what we picked for them. And without further ado, let's jump into Warrington, where fullback, and it's a tough position to start with. So I've gone for probably the most obvious name, which is Brett Hodgson, who in his 75 appearances picked up 39 tries, a 2012 Challenge Cup win alongside the Lance Todd medal, a Grand Final appearance on 2 occasions, and a League Leaders' Shield in 2011. But ultimately, as well as this, a nervy goal kicker, an international origin player for the Exiles, Hodgson had it all in his time. The only other name that I thought came close to what he achieved was another Australian import, in fact, and that is his predecessor, Chris Hicks, who likewise had a very strong record at the Wolves. But in the end, I had to go for one, and it's hard to look past Brett Hodgson. He has a very, very strong cult status, both in Warrington and in rugby league more generally, and there's good reason for that. Sticking with the Aussies, and the first of our wingers is a man who averaged a try a game over 145 Wolves appearances, and it is Joe Monaghan. The former Canberra Raider was a massive acquisition for Warrington and was again part of this core team that won the Challenge Cup titles in 2012 and 2010, in fact. He was again part of the Exile squad, albeit he didn't feature in that squad alongside Hodgson, and again was key parts of Grand Final defeats in 2012 and 2013. For Monaghan, it was obvious he was a talent, and when he left to join Castleford, a fair few eyebrows were raised as to why Warrington had let him go. And to be quite honest, he did a great job at Cass and wound down his career in Super League at a good level and showed everyone, again, why he was the talent that he was. Making it a hat-trick of Aussies and joining him on centre is Matt King, or as he is more affectionately known, the most dangerous afro in rugby league. 106 Wolves appearances, 2 Challenge Cups and a League Leaders' Shield. Matt King was one of Warrington's most underrated players, despite being a key player and somebody who really lit it up in the NRL. 66 in 106 for Warrington was a great try return, and he made his mark, let's face it, early on. A hat-trick in the Challenge Cup semi-final in 2009 against Wigan. He played that final, defeating Huddersfield, and went on to back it up again in 2010. The third Warrington inclusee in the Exile squad in the International Origin, King actually did feature, and it's fair to say the fans were quite disappointed when he announced he would be returning down under at the end of the 2011 season, moving on to South Sydney. Sticking with the theme here of overseas imports making up Warrington's best players, joining him in the centres is Toa Kolov, who, it's fair to say, was another prolific try scorer at Warrington. 75 tries in 130 appearances, and he's in his first stint, I should say, and 21 in a further 55 when he rejoined the club in 2005. By the end of that, he was at the time leading try scorer in the Super League era for Warrington, and that kind of says it all. Whilst he might not have been there in the glamorous period when the trophies started coming in, you can't really ignore that Toa was and will be a key part of the rise that Warrington had and to becoming one of the better teams in the league and the sort of team that was attractive for other players to join. Joining him on the wing is our first English player in this, and our first player who is actually still at Warrington and I've gone controversially for Matty Ashton. While there are more established names such as the likes of Josh Charnley on the market who I could have gone for me, Ashton is a talent that doesn't really get much appreciation. His 58 tries in 83 games is a very good record, and the former Swinton Lion has already shown signs of being a top winger with 3 tries and as many appearances for England. And whilst it wasn't his best showing at Wembley when Warrington fell short, I have no doubts that Ashton will win trophies in his career, be it at Warrington or whether he goes on to other things. The name I did nearly look at for this, well, there were 2 that came to mind. It was difficult to pass on another member of this early 2010s Warrington squad in Ryan Atkins, who, playing on a combination of the centre and wing, had a real knack for scoring and being in that right position. Likewise, Warrington Academy product Chris Riley, who it's fair to say isn't the most glamorous player in rugby league history, but again, he did a great job of a winger and finished plenty of tries off. In the end, though, for me, Ashton just has that little bit more flair, that bit of pace, and you give him a broken field and he will rip you to shreds. And that, ultimately, was why I decided to put him in here. Jumping into the halves then, and it is, unsurprisingly, one of the legends of the Warrington game, and it is Lee Briers. 2,500 points plus for Warrington is a fantastic return. 425 appearances. I talk about people who were there through this early Warrington dominance of the 2010s. Well, Briers had been there for over a decade prior to that. He'd even had his testimonial by the time this even came around. Multiple Challenge Cup finals, grand finals. I don't need to go through Lee Briers' success records for you to know that he is the guy. And ultimately, he's a player that Warrington have always struggled to replace, and only really since signing George Williams have they actually had somebody in that jersey who looks ready to take the league by storm and be able to grab games around the scruff of the neck. Now, of course, one thing that Williams is struggling with is a talented halfback partner who can match his level. I don't think in this fictional team Briers will have this problem with our number 7, Nathan Wood. Wood signed from Wakefield in what was an interesting signing really back in the day. He was a very good halfback though, it's fair to say. 69 tries in 90 games for a player in his position was a great record, especially given this was the tail end of his career. He would actually retire after leaving Warrington. Against Wakefield, he'd play the last win at the Old Wilderspoon in 2003 and the first try scorer at the Halliwell Jones at the start of the 04 season. His most famous game, probably his hat-trick against, if I remember rightly, Wigan, where he famously ran down one tunnel and emerged halfway down the stand later on to cap off what had been a brilliant display and a memory that, for Warrington fans of that era, no doubt me just mentioning those words will have brought that game flooding back. Now, in terms of having a good pack to play off, well, I've certainly got no doubts that my first prop forward here will be setting the platform, and that is Adrian Morley. In 173 games for the Wolves, he was captain. He won the Challenge Cup on, 3 separate occasions? Got to Old Trafford twice. But for Morley, his career was already in the flashing lights by this point. He'd done it in the NRL, he'd done it for Great Britain and England, he'd even got sent off inside 12 seconds. Morley's reputation did not need enhancing. But still at Warrington, he managed to take himself further on. It was interesting that he turned down the Roosters extension to move to Warrington for 4 years, but for them, it was a great move that he did. Despite injury taking him out of most of the 2013 season and what would be his last for Warrington, his impact was felt. And again, like we talk about Briers being a player that was difficult to replace, for a number of years after it was a case of who can we find to do the job of Morley. And that is a testament to the impact that he had over his, 7-8 seasons with the club. Moving into the hooker, and this was another very difficult position to pick. There are a lot of names that come to mind. You've got Jill's brother, Michael Monaghan. You've got Mickey Hyam, who was there for a long, long time. And, of course, Darryl Clark, who only left last year to join St Helens and was a big loss for Warrington. In the end, I did go for Clark. He was the pick. However, I've gone for the older version in John Clark. The Wigan Academy product spent 10 years at Warrington, starting in 2001, before joining Widnes for their Super League stint in 2012. In that decade, he scored 69 tries and kicked 72 goals in 234 appearances, leaving him with the hilarious mark of having 420 points. I'll let the immature humour laugh at that before we carry on. Clark was not the most glamorous hooker, but that certainly didn't mean he wasn't a good one. With a 99% tackle rate in 2004 and the fourth highest tackle in the competition a year later, the former Great Britain international was voted the greatest hooker in the club's history. And that at the time said it all and epitomised how highly rated he was. Whilst he might have missed the World Cup for England in 2008, he did win, ultimately, the Challenge Cup in 2010, and he was no doubt a big loss for Warrington. However, in the end, it didn't matter. They had other great hookers. The club achieved success. But for John Clark, he had to start in this list. Moving into my second prop, who'll be setting the platform, and it is a man who was only, again, just recently left in Chris Hill. Hill, just shy of 300 appearances for Warrington, and again, he won everything that Warrington won near enough. He got to the grand final, he won the Challenge Cup. And yeah, again, I don't need to say much. We've established how good this early 2010s Warrington team was, and Chris Hill was a part of that, and he still stuck around for the post-rebuild late 2010s when they started to get back to challenging for honours again. Going into second rows then, and we're going to start with another Warrington legend, and that is Ben Westwood. Again, 2002 to 2019, we've already covered every trophy and every major final that he appeared in from the previous guys on this list. However, for Ben Westwood, he was again a key part of the reason for that. Top tackler at the club for a number of different years. He was a Super League dream team inclusive in 2008. Like we said, Challenge Cup final wins, grand final appearances. He was literally there throughout all of them. In fact, I'll throw something else that we've not said yet. He was a part of the Yorkshire and Lancashire Ward of the Roses series for 2002. There you go. I've managed to find a new competition to bring in. During his time at Warrington, he also made it to the England squad on multiple occasions, including the 2013 World Cup and 2011 Four Nations, where England would ultimately fall to Australia at Ellen Road in the final. Westwood, again, another player that Warrington have been consistently since then searching for the next. And we're actually going to keep a theme going in the second rows, and it's going to be a pair of Bens, as I go for the next player who is still actively at Warrington. That is Ben Curry, who he's also closing in on 300 appearances for the Wolves. He spent time all over the pitch, really, including centre, loose forward, but it's at second row I think he's largely considered to be at his most effective. Despite having a few injury problems over the years, he's certainly shown his class on multiple occasions. Dream Team inclusive in 2016, despite getting an ACL actually towards the back end of that season, he played his parts even when his body didn't really seem to want him to. A Challenge Cup winner again in those all-conquering 2012 and 2019 seasons. He also experienced heartbreak losing to Catalans and Hull FC in the same competition, as well as being a part of all Warrington's grand final appearances, which, as we know, is yet to be their year. For Curry, will it come? it's hard to say, but if Warrington are able to string it together and get to the big prize this year, then no doubt Ben Curry will be at the forefront of that and leading wire all the way. And capping out my starting team here is Simon Griggs. Now, this was another difficult decision, and I did look at Vinnie Anderson as another potential player to throw in at this loose forward spot. But in the end, I went for Griggs. And that's mostly because of his longevity. Again, 2006 to 2015, I won't reel off the things that they've won again, but he was again the key part of that early 2010s Warrington stronghold. He wasn't necessarily the starter every game with just 164 appearances, but that didn't matter because his impact was definitely felt on the pitch. While never representing England, he did ultimately become an Irish international for the 2008 World Cup. However, was omitted for the final selection, debuting in 2010. Sadly, injury ruled his 2013 campaign over, and after going back to his boyhood club Halifax, he would ultimately retire at the end of 2013. Obviously, since then he has gone on to form himself as a coach in the game, with a few games at Halifax on an interim basis between 2019 and 2023. And obviously now is at Hull FC as we speak, with still question marks on whether or not he will be there next year, but he is still the Hull FC coach as things stand. And I didn't mention this at the time, but given we've got Brett Hodgson at fullback, he's the second Hull FC coach to be on this list, which is a very random fact I didn't think would be coming out when I started this video. Jumping into the backup hooker I've gone for as my number 14, and that is the aforementioned Michael Monaghan. Unlucky not to start, really. Monaghan was, again, a key part of Warrington's early 2010s success, and he was one of those players that you looked to when the team needed a lift. As well as his club honours, he was proving himself individually time and time again, winning the 2009 Lance Todd Trophy en route to the Challenge Cup that year, which, of course, as we said, he would pick up two further iterations of in 2010 and 2012. For Monaghan, he would ultimately retire largely due to, I guess, niggling injuries. There wasn't really one thing that took him out, but I think he just knew his time was up. He did have a very brief foray into coaching, joining the assistants at Catalan for 2015, and following Fraser-New's sacking, he was very temporarily in charge of the club, although I'm not actually sure if they ever got to play a game during his tenure. He, in fact, has the infamous of being Steve McNamara's predecessor, which, again, there you go, there's an interesting fact to end Monaghan's off. And joining him on the bench is Gareth Carvell. Now, the second prop forward here to come through the Rhinos Academy after Adrian Morley. Carvell's arrival at Warrington wasn't without controversy. The then Great Britain international had signed a deal that would have kept him at Hull FC for 3 years. However, controversy U-turned that, and following Warrington putting some money on the table, he would be playing for the Blue and Primrose for 2009. And what a shrewd signing it was. Winning the Challenge Cup in his first and second seasons, again in 2012 and of course 2013, they once again made it back-to-back grand finals. Carvell would ultimately leave Warrington at the end of that season, rejoining Hull FC for a very short stint before Castleford and Featherstone wound his career to an end. But the Welsh, British and English international was certainly an impact player, and not just with the size of him. And for Warrington, he seems like the perfect player to bring on to keep that ship steady and keep the meters coming in. And speaking of big forwards who keep the meters coming in, actually, is a man who spent the bulk of his career at Warrington, amassing over 330 appearances, and it is Paul Wood. Wood gained a reputation for making the hard yards, the offloads, and generally giving it a 10-10 on the work rate. He won all that Warrington did in his 14-year stint before he would ultimately drop down the divisions to play for Featherstone for one final season before hanging up his boots, albeit he did briefly pop out of retirement again to appear for Swinton 3 years later. Wood's most famous memory as a player probably wasn't even actually what he did on the pitch necessarily, and it certainly wasn't for what he won. Now, as many people might remember what I'm referring to when I mentioned the 2012 Grand Final, and in the early stages of that, Wood suffered a rather painful sounding injury where he ruptured his right testicle. Finishing the game and actually doing pretty well throughout it, even doing the media interviews, actually, it was only really when he was tweeted that he was in hospital afterwards that anyone realised kind of what had gone on by then. A testament to his hard man on pitch persona, Paul Wood was definitely one of your first names on your team sheet throughout his 15-year stint at Warrington. And that's kind of the sort of longevity and elite levels that I could not ignore and overlook when doing this list. So 21 minutes in, 16 players down and just one man left to go. And this was a tough decision. I kind of haven't really committed my bench to be necessarily a working bench. It's just so happened that so far we've got 2 props and a hooker. And I am going to put probably the best utility player in Super League. A man who is still playing today at Warrington, albeit we expect him to leave this year. And that is Stefan Ratchford. For me, Ratchford is one of Warrington's greatest of all time, and the fact he doesn't start is merely because he's yet to really nail down a position. Be it fullback, centre or in the halves, Ratchford has done it all and arguably won it all by that elusive Grand Final. With over 1,500 points for the Wolves, Ratchford is a player that we all know plenty about, and I don't need to tell you much more about his game other than how much, even at 35 years old, I really rate him highly and would happily take him at my own club. So, Stefan, I think that's testament enough to you. So what do you guys think of that 17? Have I overlooked anyone obvious? Have I equally put someone in there that frankly you don't ever think was that good? Let me know your thoughts, guys, and let me know which club you want me to cover next in this series. And until next time, goodbye.